Hi, I'm Lydia Foxglove, and I've largely been making my living as a novelist since 2009 when I was only 27. The series I'm best known for, the one that bought this house, is a series of smutty fairy tales. But when I was 11 years old, I created a fantasy world full of characters and cultures that has held my heart ever since. I filled sketchbooks and notebooks and computer files, countless ones, with comic books, stories, sketches. I even invented a language, or conlang. When I dreamed of becoming a writer, it was not just a writer, but the creator of this world. However, 'tis a quirky place. One of the first stories that I ever wrote was about a skeleton who would pass by a health club on his way to his dungeon of darkness where he lived, and the bodybuilders standing out front would make fun of him for being a skeleton who couldn't get ripped. Probably gives you an idea of I was not just a Tolkien imitator. It's evolved a lot since then because, I'm not 11. The algorithms don't really like quirky, as I have learned. How they work is you put something out there, and if a decent number of people respond to it, then the algorithm will go, oh, we can make money on this, and they'll show it to more people, and if those people like it, then they'll show it to more people, and so on. That's how you get things going viral. Or you can put out something that only a small amount of people like, and even though those people may really love the thing, the algorithm thinks, nobody really likes this, so it will get buried. You've probably noticed this, whether it's with your Kindle recommendations, your Netflix, or your YouTube feed, but a lot of artwork is starting to feel kind of smoothed over, and for the masses, you might see things that aren't quite what really you like, but are very popular. Therefore, if you put out something a little quirky, it's not just a little hard to sell, it's a lot hard to get visibility. So I have not spent much of my life on this beloved fantasy world. I have spent most of my time writing things that are easy to sell. I just have this need to tell this story. I'm at that point where I'm just like, if it's possible, let's just do it. In this video, I'm going to give you a quick rundown of my professional writing career with some numbers, a quick history of what I actually want to do, and a brief overview of my crazy plans for the next couple of years. Overall, this video is an introduction, but what I want this channel to be is I want it to feel like when you sit down with a friend that does the same thing you do and is struggling with the same things, and you just have a nice hot drink and you vent it all out, and you maybe talk about what you're working on, and when you're done you just feel so energized, ready to deal with the struggle, also fired up to get to work. You just feel refreshed. Pour yourself a hot beverage, I'm a hot cocoa girl, and just relax. I hope that it fires you up to create something, or not. Maybe it makes you want to just relax today. I've wanted to be a writer since I was first aware that writers existed. I wrote my first novel when I was 9 years old. My mom would write down stories I would dictate to her when I was like 2 and 3. And when I was 9 years old, I created my first set of original characters that I would tell stories about. It was this family of gangster cats, and from there we moved on to genies and mermaids whose plot lines were all based on The Young and the Restless, which my mom was watching a lot at the time because early 90s. It was that autumn when I was 11 though, that everything just kind of clicked. It's that magic age. I was reading all of the Xanth novels. I was playing Final Fantasy IV, which was 2 for Super Nintendo. And The Nightmare Before Christmas hit theaters. We saw it on opening weekend, and I came out of the theater in like a stupor. I just thought, this is what I need, a world based on all this stuff. At first, it was truly a mess. It was poorly developed, it was silly, and well, it was the kind of thing that you come up with when you're 11 and 9 years old. Each new thing we got into was incorporated into the world, and we were just living for it. The stories, the cultures, over the years, everything became more and more considered It continued to be my favorite hobby, my passion, and my therapy into my 20s. My characters were like my own found family, and their world was like a home that could never be taken from me. Everything there was under my control, and I couldn't lose it, or so I thought. When I was 23, I had not gone to college. All I really wanted to be was a writer, but it seemed unrealistic and scary. So I started looking into getting a degree to become a librarian. As I was researching colleges and everything, I thought, you really want to be a writer, and you're young, you have time. Take 4 years, see what happens, and if at the end of 4 years you haven't sold a book, then get the degree, become a real adult, all of that. So for 4 years, I took writing as seriously as if it was a full-time job. I made myself prioritize writing over everything else. I was not allowed to do anything but go to my retail job, eat, sleep. Once that was done, I had to sit down and write at least 1,000 words a day before I could do any hobbies, anything. Spoiler alert, she would never have hobbies again. And I also had to start submitting this one novel I had already written when I was 18, even though I was very nervous about it. Deep down, I knew it wasn't great, but just close your eyes and get it out there. And while that was on submission and getting lots of rejections, I started working on another novel. I ended up rewriting this novel twice. It took 3 years. And at the end of the 3 years, I got an agent. And as soon as I got an agent, she sold it in like a month. This was my first novel, Magic Under Glass. Yes, hi, if you know me as Lydia, you probably guessed that is a pen name, and I'm sticking with it for reasons I may get into someday. So in 2009, Bloomsbury published my debut novel, Magic Under Glass, and over the next couple years, they published 2 more books for me, Between the Sea and Sky and Magic Under Stone, the sequel to Magic Under Glass. Those books did okay, but I had that sense that I need to punch it up and give editors something that would excite them in the current marketplace in 2012. So I wrote something that was bigger and darker. This was Dark Metropolis. My agent was very excited about it. She sent it out. It sold in an auction very quickly. I had the vaunted 6-figure deal for Dark Metropolis and a sequel. All told, those 5 novels sold for a collective $250,000. And that was about what I lived on from 2009 to 2015, minus the agent fees, minus taxes. Even though I was selling books, I was probably living on about $24,000 a year net. Still, I am very frugal and I managed to make this work up until 2012 when my editor went on maternity leave and the book got delayed a year and the money I was supposed to get got delayed a year. I had no money. So I ended up becoming a full-time eBay seller because I had lived down the street from an auction house, and that was a full-time job. And I was also working on the edits for Dark Metropolis and then writing the sequel. At this point, the fact that I had written Dark Metropolis to appeal to editors really started to bite me because I didn't have the long-term excitement for the book to carry me through difficult editing rounds and writing a sequel, which I had not planned on. I just started having the most terrible time with it. I got so depressed during this time. Usually before I would get to work, I would crawl under my desk and just kind of be in a fetal position, just like, no. It was really bad. I just felt like I'd taken a wrong turn. I was not writing books for me. I was not following the reason I'd become a writer. I was just writing to please my agent and my editor, and it was not their fault. They were lovely. They're just trying to put out books that will sell, and I had given them one, or so they thought. But I was still just dreaming of my fantasy world. In the margins between all this work, I wrote a book that was set there, and once this whole nightmare was over, I was like, I want to sell this book. I had always had a fantastic relationship with my agent, and I still love her, but she just didn't really get this book, and I had to break the partnership which was very hard because we really hadn't had any issues besides that I just was so attached to this book. I just felt like I had to give it a fair chance, so I looked for another agent. Nobody wanted it. But at this time, I had some friends who were starting to do well in self-publishing, mostly in romance. It was starting to feel more accessible, so I decided I would self-publish this book set in my fantasy world. I made every mistake that you can possibly make. The cover was off trend. I didn't really know how to write a good blurb. I did everything wrong. I tried to rework it and republish it. Still a disaster. This is a really common mistake with indie publishing, and if any of you are in this spot, I really feel for you. You write this book of your heart and you put it out there. You might invest some money into a nice cover. It's full of all your hopes and dreams, and then you haven't thought about where in the market this book is going to go. There has to be some kind of pre-existing place in most cases, or it's just gonna sit there. Like, no matter how much you love it, if no one's searching for that thing, you're out of luck. If there is one fairly solid formula for successful indie publishing, it's to research books that are doing well and then kind of imitate them. The cover should be attractive to the people who like that book. The blurb should have some similar tropes. You want to give the people that found a book that they loved and they finished it and they're looking for the next thing, you want your book to say, my book is the next thing. This makes it sound like you just have to plan it to trend, but you don't always. You can take an idea that you already had and kind of figure out just how to bend it to the trend. I started thinking at this point, a novel set in my world that also fits the trend. What would that look like? My first book set in that world, at least that did anything at all. I had planned out the covers and the blurbs and the entire plot to fit the market a little better. And from summer of 2016 to winter of 2017, I released a trilogy, The Sorcerer's Concubine, The Sorcerer's Wife, and The Sorcerer's Equal. To date, these books have made $46,600 minus advertising, which is a decent chunk. This is not a huge hit by indie standards, but it was enough to keep going. Unfortunately, I followed it up with a book where I went right back to making a zillion mistakes. I went from the books that were making thousands of dollars to a new release that made like $100 after working on it for 3 months. So that wasn't gonna work, and I was so sad. I had gone from finally living my dream, putting out the books in my world. I didn't want riches. I didn't want a bunch of status and fame. I just wanted to publish these books and make enough to pay my bills. I had it for a shining moment and then it was gone. I had to pivot to something that was more reliable and fast. Enter fairy tale heat. While researching indie books, I ended up in a world that I knew nothing about, romance. I had read lots of books with romance in them, but I had never, ever read romance. I had always loved fairy tales. And as I was researching, I thought, this just seems like a natural fit. I collect vintage fairy tale collections. I already knew a lot about fairy tales. I plotted out Beauty and the Goblin King, and I wrote it in 12 days, and it became my best-selling book to date. It was my first Lydia Foxglove book. It just flowed out of me. It was so fun. And Fairy Tale Heat ended up being 14 books and counting at this point. I do have some more Fairy Tale Heat books planned despite the general theme of this video. To date, that series has made $216,300 minus advertising expenses, which can be a sizable chunk, but still, that series changed my life. After I wrote Fairy Tale Heat, in 2018, Reverse Harem started to get hot. Reverse Harem started an anime where it would have one girl with a bunch of guys. At the end, she'd pick one. In indie publishing, people decided, why not just let her have all of them? Kind of polyamorous romance. that can range from very chaste and very story driven to just, I was drawn to this trend because I loved anime and manga. That was a lot of the storytelling that influenced me. So I thought there might be a lot of anime and manga fans reading Reverse Harem, and I could base some plot lines on anime and manga that I enjoyed. My first book in that realm, Priestess Awakened, was a mashup of the Fushigi Yugi anime and Final Fantasy IV. That did pretty well, so I wrote a follow-up to that. In 2019, I started working on kind of a Harry Potter meets Boys Over Flowers manga. I'm not going to detail every book I wrote during this period because I was churning them out. I hit the Reverse Harem Academy trend like right at the sweet spot. 2019 was the year where I made $100,000. Everything was going great. Now there are indie authors out there that make like 7 figures a year. I know some of them. 100,000 in 1 year is still nowhere near the ceiling. I don't even know if there is a ceiling. For me, who'd been living on 20-something thousand dollars a year and like selling postcards on eBay to scrape together my bills, $100,000 in 1 year was insane. This was my formula for 4 years. Write the fairy tales, write Reverse Harem, just keep churning them out, make the money. You're on the Amazon treadmill, you're working the algorithms. I was writing like 10 books a year, making money, no vacations, no rest, no hobbies. Just work. By 2021, it might not be a surprise that I was starting to suffer a little bit of burnout. I had not taken time out for myself since that point when I decided I was going to take writing seriously instead of going to college. It had been over 10 years since I'd taken any time for myself of any real note. I had not spent any time with this world that I had put so much into. So I had the idea I would try to get around this by taking some of the characters and some of the themes from this world and inserting them into a very tropey Reverse Harem book. I was going to take the seed of what I loved about some of my characters and completely transform them into a modern urban fantasy kind of setting. I spent all this time planning out the series. It was called Shifters Among Us. I put it out there and it flopped so badly. Like, it was dragging my entire income down the drain. It was making like a few $100s a book. I had to cancel the series or I was going to go broke, and I was depressed again. I felt like I'd gotten so far only to crash again, my income plummeting, a series I was really excited about flopping. I was so burned out. I thought I might have to make a living selling stuff on eBay again, but what can you do? I was a writer. This is all I had done. So I had to pick myself up, come up with something. I booked a trip. It was kind of pandemic time still, so I went to a virtual conference, the Romance Authors Mastermind Conference, and it was a big deal for me, an immersive weekend of online panels, and I thought, this is going to fire me up. This will give me some ideas. I had my notebook. I'm watching all the panels, and as I was watching all the panels, every speaker would talk about how they loved romance since they were a teenager, and they were so happy to be writing it. And all I could think was, I don't love romance. I love romantic plot lines. I love when the main plot of a book is a romance, but in my heart, I'm a fantasy writer. I thought it would be easy for me to adapt to writing romance because of the fact that I love romantic plot lines, but I realized as I was writing it and interacting with the readers that romance and fantasy with a romantic plot line are a different vibe. And I had grown up reading Mercedes Lackey, ElfQuest comics, Tanith Lee, Sharon Shin, kind of feminine vibe fantasy books. I had been struggling so hard to market my romance books. Like I would book a takeover on a Facebook group, and I would try to come up with like the little games and pictures of shirtless men, and I'm so demisexual. I don't like looking at shirtless men. It was like actively painful for me. I hate saying this because romance gets dumped on and disrespected, and I don't think that it deserves that reputation. Even whether it's like a fluffy, silly, ultra cozy romance or a dark romance, I think there are people out there who need those books. I got lovely fan letters while I was writing romance. People would tell me these books were my comfort while I was in the hospital or going through a divorce. Whatever major crisis you can have in life, people turn to romance and the escapism and just that feeling that it gives you. I want to make it clear I am not disapproving of romance as a genre. I fully approve. I'm not into shaming anyone for what they read. When you say that you don't really like romance, you get a lot of people going, oh, good for you, because romance is toxic and terrible and stupid anyway. And I don't feel that way, even though some of them to me personally feel that way, but I want the people who love them to have them. I'm not out there dissing on books. I just had to be honest with myself about what really excited me as a writer and get back to my fantasy roots. But how? I still needed to make money, and I don't write the most saleable fantasy. I didn't know where that stuff would fit in, so I just set it aside and I started planning out a paranormal monster series, stuff that was like tried and true romance. Hey, editing Lydia here. Real quick, just a little of the footage got corrupted. What it should say is that my father-in-law passed away and we had to suddenly, kind of out of nowhere, rush down to Florida and pack up all his stuff. And he was a hoarder of collectibles, especially Legos. He had over 1,000 Lego sets. So that event is the catalyst for this section of the video. It was a lot. We quickly packed it up in 2 pods, and then we brought it up here to our house. We're both collectors, so we already had a pretty full house, and now we've got like an entire hoarder house to store. And for 2 years, we couldn't have guests over, or the house was just packed with the stuff. It was kind of a nightmare. I would just be taking apart Lego sets hours upon hours and listing them on eBay, trying to get through it all. And while I was doing that, I started watching a lot of YouTube. I was watching a lot of like cottagecore, cozy, simple living, creative living, watching people on YouTube talking in a very personal way about how they'd been struggling with a lot of the same issues I had been, like burnout and hustle culture. While I was on this semi-enforced break, well, it just caused me to rethink my entire life. Capitalism had consumed me. And it seemed like a lot of people were feeling the same. Like, we've had a capitalist society for a long time, but something about the rise of social media in particular, it seemed, had caused a lot of people to feel like I did. Like, there was all this shiny stuff, everyone else seemed to be having fun, buying stuff. There's a lot of FOMO. And on the other hand, you yourself are just working so hard, you feel like you can never turn it off. I had pretty much given up on everything except work, and I was making money, I was spending money, but I didn't have time to enjoy any of the things that I would buy with my money. So they'd just sit there and I'd admire them. My characters in my world had been on the back burner this entire time. For many years after I stopped having time to write about them, I still would think about them, especially when I was in the shower or going to sleep, and then I would have dreams about them. I felt like I was still connected to the world. But I realized I wasn't having those dreams anymore. In fact, most of my dreams were nightmares. I had been really proud that I had managed to keep hold of that thing that brought me so much joy in childhood and all that wonder. It seemed like a lot of people had that when they were younger and they lost it, and I had kept hold of it. And now it was finally starting to really slip away. When I was sad or worried about something, whereas I used to be able to kind of turn to this world and sort through things or just kind of have a comforting place to land my thoughts, now I was starting to have more anxiety and I just didn't have anywhere to put it. And believe me, I have had so many moments over the years where a part of me wanted to put the world aside, I felt like it was holding me back in my career. You're an adult, I would tell myself. Stop being sad about it and move on like anybody else. Grow up. When I was watching my father-in-law on his deathbed, it got me thinking about, when I die, what would my regret be? What would be the thing that I wish I'd spent more time on? And the gut answer was always, I wish I had written these stories. I don't know if anyone's going to want to read them. I don't know if anyone cares. But a part of me also feels like some things are just come from a higher place, and it is not your place to question whether they're marketable or what happens to them when you're done with them. You just have to create them. I think that magic is part of what makes creativity feel so amazing. Still, how? I still have to make a living, and if my living is being made writing 10 romance novels a year, that just doesn't leave time, or even physically, like my eyes and hands, I'm not getting any younger. It's hard to write that many books for other people and yourself. So here's my grand plan, my crazy plan. I don't know how it will turn out. It's going to be like a 2-year experiment. First, I focused on trimming my expenses down to like $3,000 a month. I also have a part-time job now at a used bookstore, which is a great job and I love it. That takes care of like $1,000, so I need $2,000 a month to live. Most of the time I've been an indie writer and even a traditionally published writer, I have managed to make that. Some of my ideas are not totally off market. I mean, they're not just crazy off market. So it feels possible. But I also started thinking about, how can I take the pressure off without just writing other books that are gonna suck all the time away. I was talking to my best friend and talking to her about YouTube, and I realized that if people were more of a fan of me talking about my world and creativity in general than they were of reading the books themselves, would that be okay with me? And I thought it would. One of my favorite books is The Letters of J.R.R. Tolkien. I've only read Lord of the Rings once. The letters of J.R.R. Tolkien, on the other hand, I really connect with. I've read them multiple times. So there is something to be said for the creative process rather than the creative product. So I thought maybe I could maintain a space that is not the books themselves, but is an in-depth look at creating a fantasy world, at the practical side of writing and creative life, whether it's the financial part or the actually getting the writing done, and then the emotional part, the joy and the struggle of being a creator. And I want this channel, like I said, to be a comforting place for anyone who is or really wants to be a full-time creative. These YouTube channels really helped me when I was going through a hard time myself, and I would love to pay that forward a little. I would love it to spark creativity or comfort or anything in you too. I would love it if I could help someone the way that other creators who are also just normal people talking to their cameras just like this, I would love if I could help someone else even a little. Maybe some of you will be here for my books, and maybe some of you will be here for my chats. And whether it's one or the other or both, I'm so grateful for you to be here. So if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. I also have a Patreon and a mailing list where I'll be putting supplementary stuff. I would love to get a video up weekly. It might be more like twice a month because I'm just starting and I'm still figuring out the equipment, the lighting, the editing process. I've already made so many mistakes today. It's taken me so long. I would love to hear in the comments what you're creating, whether it's for money or not, and if you've been struggling with anything lately. Have you found a way to fit that creative joy in around your worries and your day job and all of that sort of thing? Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.